Welcome to Mindset and Muscles with Amanda. I'm your host, Amanda Ferlisi. Garrett, thank you for returning for episode 3 of our physical therapy series. So we got some good questions, but I kind of want to start off with, so in case anyone didn't know, Garrett's wife is due about any second. So how's that going?
It's going good. We're trying to prepare as best we can. Technically any day now. So, I've now realized that I'm a terrible painter. When I tried to paint the nursery, we've got all the furniture in. I wrestled with the car seat for far too long than I care to admit. But I think the major pieces are in place, and now it's just trying to wrap our heads around what this unknown is going to be and kind of enjoying the process. So it's exciting. It's exciting, terrifying, but exciting. And I think
you're gonna be a father. That's wild.
I know. It's kind of nutty, but at the same time, I'm pretty stoked about it. So it should be
wait, do you know if you're having a boy or girl?
It's a boy. Yep. So
wow.
Yeah.
A mini version of you. A very mini, because you're very tall, so it's like gonna be this big.
Yeah, right. So it should all be good. We have a year-old puppy, so it's been getting her on board with trying to minimize her puppiness for the new arrival as well. So
I see how you planned that. You planned that very well.
Yeah. Looking back, who knows if it was the best plan, but it's the one we have in place. So we're rolling with it.
I think the past couple of years are rolling with the punches anyway. So I think you guys are doing just fine. What color did you paint the nursery? We need to know details.
My wife will probably kill me when I butcher the color. I want to say it's like a grayish blue.
Ooh.
Yeah, so a grayish blue with the kind of natural wood toned furniture. I'm sure that's 100% wrong, but from what I remember, that sounds right to me.
It sounds right to me because I know nothing about any of that stuff. I mean, I painted this room and I did a really good job. Sorry, my dog's barking because he's a bear and doesn't care about anyone else's life. It's his world. I live in it.
Naturally.
And his name's Frank Sinatra, in case anyone was wondering. But so I don't know anything about that. So in my mind, I have this visual and it looks really nice. So
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I mean, painting, you'll get the hang of it. It's fine. How's your wife feeling?
She's hanging in there. She's hanging in there pretty tough. I think she's not sleeping great, which makes kind of everything a little bit more challenging, but she's doing great. I keep getting updates and keep checking in. We get her out for walks as much as we can, given the weather. That hasn't been cooperating, but
it's going to be negative 25-degree wind chill this weekend. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah. I'm super stoked.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for that.
Do you want to go back to California yet, or what do you think?
If California didn't burn down every other year, I think the argument to get back there would be much stronger. But it's weekends like this that make it sound pretty damn good.
I understand. Well, hopefully your son is born maybe on Maurizio's birthday, the 23rd. That'd be funny. We've had a lot of friends that just had a baby and now having a baby next week. So a lot of babies this month. Maurizio, don't get any ideas. So I'm gonna get. He wants to have like 10 babies. It's like you don't have the babies. Like you don't grow them. So like you don't have 100% say. But I have a really good question to start off today's episode with. Things you wish you would have known about becoming a physical therapist before becoming a physical therapist.
That is a really good question. I'd say the first thing that I would say I wish I knew was how broad the physical therapy profession is. Not that that's a negative thing, but when I showed up to school, to a certain extent, the only experience I'd had with PT was in the back of a Gold's Gym, kind of doing the traditional outpatient model. And, I liked what I saw enough to go to school. And then in school, you kind of learn that, there are physical therapists that work on oncology units. There are physical therapists that work in wound care and kind of in these really medically intense settings. And I would say it was kind of eye-opening to see and try and learn at least the baseline level of knowledge required for all of those different skill sets. And then on the flip side, like once I figured out where I wanted to go, I kind of realized how deep you have to dive after graduation. So I wish to some point, I wish I had figured out my direction earlier, because it took a good amount of conscious effort post-graduation to figure out where I wanted to go and the type of philosophy that I wanted to follow and the type of treatment that I wanted to provide. That if I had known earlier, I could have done some of that foundational type work prior. Massachusetts is a great example, but there are a lot of great strength and conditioning facilities in the area that do a lot of good nuanced work that I find very interesting now. And I think if I had been exposed to that either prior to PT school or during PT school, I would have come out with a little bit more of a directed effort towards my continuing education, which, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but could have accelerated some of the things that I wanted to do.
But do you regret that though? Because like I understand, like that's with anything. Like a lot of people don't know who they want to target in like the fitness industry, or most people our age don't even know what they're doing or like what they want to do still. So do you regret like the phases that you went through prior to becoming a physical therapist? And then like, do you regret any of that? Like, what did you learn from it?
No, I wouldn't say there's any regret. I think a lot of my previous experiences, while I wish they had happened faster because I'm really happy in the position that I'm in now, I think some of the non-clinical skills, I think I needed that experience. The new facility that I'm at, I'm kind of running the operations and putting all the systems in place to eventually scale, and trying to do that without sacrificing any of the clinical care. And I think that I saw a lot of things through managing clinics and seeing the way bigger companies are run and different models of companies are run that kind of formed my opinions as to how I want to direct things here, and how I want to implement systems to allow for healthy growth, while also giving good care. So I don't necessarily think I regret it. How can you regret something you were really unaware of back in the day, right? I mean, I think for all intents and purposes, growing up in high school, and my high school athletics had an alumni who had become an athletic trainer who was training us for a significant discount, because none of us were in a position to go pay for a personal trainer. So he grouped us all together, and I got exposed to Olympic lifts and some of the programming and stuff that at that time was solid programming. So I definitely got exposed to a lot, but I think the next level would have been in college or prior to PT school, if I had been able to or known to look for a facility that was doing some of these nuanced techniques and nuanced systems that would have, while I was in PT school, could have taken advantage of that. A lot of the guys in my class that had been exposed to that were able to, and I don't know if they had the foresight, if they saw the writing on the wall with the way the field was moving, or if they just kind of pursued their interests and the field aligned with their interests.
Yeah.
Who's to say? But I think they've really reaped the benefits of kind of being exposed to those things early. And so no regrets, just kind of looking back on the landscape and being like, oh, I wish I had known,
right,
type deal. But yeah, so back to the initial question of what I wish I had known prior to PT school was, I guess, really how much learning takes place after school. I think there was always this idea that, the field's evolving, medicine is always evolving, the fitness industry and strength and conditioning industry is always evolving. It can be heavy on the fads. And I think, especially with social media and seeing what's out there, like you see a lot of things that are presented in a way that can either be overcomplicated or oversimplified or packaged well. And I think a lot of your learning takes place after school, especially figuring out which direction you want to go. So my personal path took me down a lot of the neuromuscular, a lot of the breath work, and how the rib cage and the pelvis impacts movement and strength and conditioning, and then how to implement that into a more active program that focuses on some of the big lifts and focuses on general strengthening, and really focuses on movement efficiency. So, but it just, you learn significantly more after school than you do in school.
Yeah, because you're just applying everything and like
Yeah.
figuring out what works, what doesn't work. I think
Yeah.
that's with any like I know personal training. I had one vision of doing something this way and teaching people this way. And then you have all these different personalities, all these different bodies, all these different injuries, obviously, which is why I consult with you. And it's like the way that I originally thought I was going to train someone has always just kind of like fluctuated based per person. And I actually wanted to touch on the fact that you brought something up that really grinds my gears. It's the social media aspect. Now that you're on social media, all like these stupid fad things. How does that affect your business or your way of teaching clients how, like in physical therapy, like do they see things that are like, oh, why aren't we doing this? Do you ever have those issues? Because I probably have that issue on average a couple of times a week where a client's like, well, this, and I'm like, but what is that? What is that going to achieve? So do you see any of that?
Not as much in our patient population. I would say a lot of the people that we get are very interested in diving deep into our philosophy, and the biomechanics of what's going on and how we see it through our lens. I think it's more, at least from what I've experienced and from what I've witnessed, it's a lot of kind of clinician on clinician chirping. And, at times, I think as PTs, we want to have this very, very deep knowledge of the biomechanics and of the body. And rightfully so, right? Like the better depth of your knowledge, the more informed your clinical decisions can be. I think at times we have a hard time simplifying it when we relate it to the client or when we relate it to the patient. So, if I have a client that comes in and has been relatively inactive due to COVID, due to a sedentary job, due to any type of a number of environmental stressors, sure, there's a laundry list of biomechanical things going on, but like the primary focus should be getting them moving well without pain. And sometimes that's as simple as an assault bike or a sled push, or getting them familiar with resistance type training. So I do a lot of floor presses because it's kind of a hard exercise to mess up. But I think looking at social media it's a lot of tribalism. And I think it's really hard not to take the bait sometimes. And I think that my strategy has been more, I don't post nearly as much as I should.
You need to work on that.
I know.
That's okay. At least you're on social media. It took a couple of years, but you're finally there.
I know. It's been a one of the other my colleagues here is not that much younger than me, but he's younger than me and basically made the account for me. So I'm like the old man. But I think a lot of times people get amped up and social media kind of devolves into these opposing camps, versus people just putting out things that they think are valuable. So I think my take, while I still have a certain amount of discomfort of posting just because I'm not comfortable with it, I think my strategy has been much more just putting out things that I think are valuable. And then if somebody asks a question, I give them my rationale, but it's very non-confrontational, at least in my opinion. I think as a clinician looking at things on social media, it's not hard to not take the bait, but I think things are set up to engage sometimes. And I think, I think there are systems on social that are being presented on social media that have value, that are presented well. I think there are systems on social media that take something that doesn't necessarily need to be overcomplicated and really tries to make it complicated. And then I think there are systems that don't have a huge presence on social media that do have a lot of value, that take a little bit more effort to find. So I think as a clinician looking at social media, it's really big to remain a critical thinker and to kind of take everything in and try and build it within your own treatment framework. Because that's, when it comes down to it, your value as a clinician is interfacing with clients. Mm-hmm. And there's no value to anybody for you getting into it with somebody on social media. But it's been interesting to watch the landscape of the strength conditioning and PT world on social media.
It's honestly like, I could probably do a whole podcast just on that. I was just thinking, like, in my head, I probably should, but if I had it, I would not need to work for the rest of my life. If for the amount of times I've been asked, well, just put me on a keto diet so I can lose weight. If I literally, I wouldn't have to work ever. I could just travel the world because of the shit that's on there. That's just with dieting alone. Dieting, I don't even know if I want to touch right now because that's just like a rabbit hole. And then it divides people and whatever, just like politics. And then on working out, people will see someone work out there. They look at someone and they see this body that they want to have or aspects of it. They're like, well, this person does this. Okay. But when it comes to strength training and changing your physique, it's literally the basics and then adding resistance over time. And that's just what it is. And people try to make it cool and do backflips and a spin and then a split. And that's how you're going to achieve the body. But I just wanted to know on your perspective, because from the fitness end, it's just in fuckery. That's the best way I can explain it, because you'll have a lot of people that are very intelligent that they fall into trends of, this one particular exercise that's going to make your biceps bigger or your glutes bigger or something like that. And it's just super frustrating. I'm not going to go on a tangent, but I didn't know if
I will say that, I think what a problem that we run into that probably is consistent across your field as well is that the expectations of progress.
Yes.
So, somebody will see something on social media, they'll come in, they'll ask us about it, we'll talk through it, whether we implement it or not is a game time decision. But I think what I have seen is that people will come in with this kind of skewed expectation of how quickly they can see progress. And they've defined progress as the person that is doing the thing on social media, versus kind of understanding that rehabilitation into strength and conditioning is far more about behavioral changes than it is about the actual interventions that we're implementing.
Absolutely.
So I think that probably has been something that we've dealt with. Just not even just managing expectations, but kind of reframing people's mindsets when it comes to what PT is. And PT in our facility can span the spectrum from coming in acute pain to trying to improve their performance. So, that's not a 2-month process. Getting out of pain can be a pretty quick process, but if you have high goals, that is a process. It's going to have plateaus. It's going to have sharp increases in progress. And I think people sometimes have to be reminded that it's far more about behavior and far more about, going to the gym when you don't want to, or if you don't want to go to the gym, making sure you go for a walk, or getting some of these volume in some capacity in order to take these incremental steps to achieve their goals. So I'd say that's probably the one that we kind of run into the most.
I think you nailed it, honestly, because every single person that comes in, I'll just use weight loss. Not everyone's goal is weight loss. It's just the most common. People think that they're going to lose weight in a week or 2 weeks. They're on a meal plan. They're going to drop 10 pounds, or they're going to train with me once a week. for 2 months and think that they're going to achieve their results without, you know, like looking at the diet, changing the diet around and things like that. It's just, it's just probably one of the biggest like grinding of gears that I can even think of, because you can't, whether it's fitness or um, physical therapy, like if you're going to physical therapy for an injury, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time. And also, I wanted to mention that as far as how long you should see a physical therapist, in my opinion, if you're an active person like myself, you should see a physical therapist at least once a month to check in. If that, like, I know insurance and all that stuff plays a huge role, but I know that the moment I started going to physical therapy, when it was prior to meeting you, I was going 3 times a week, and then I would go at your place, what, like once a week or twice a week. And now I'm down to going once a month right now, because I've got control over like my mechanics, and I still, arch my back and a little like certain things, but I just think it's super important, if anyone's even like an athlete or just works out regularly, that they should be going to physical therapy, because just that time that you go in, you can tweak something and it's going to prevent any issues down the road.
I mean, I think that there is some value to what you just said. I think that, I mean, depending on the model, we're out of network, so we're not totally dependent on insurance. So we do have people that come for regular check-ins, and we also have a monthly program. People get a program built for them, and then a monthly visit. I think, without giving a sweeping statement of how much people should see PT, I think if you end up in physical therapy for an injury, which a lot of people do, any plan of care or any frequency should be attached to some type of clinical finding or decision making. So that can be something like you described. You start off at a higher frequency, you taper it down to the point where you're doing check-ins. If your situation allows for that, if insurance allows for that, if you're capable of paying out of pocket. But I think that should always be attached to some type of clinical reasoning. So if anyone is thinking of that route, I think that talking to the clinician as to why they are prescribing that plan of care is valuable. And as a smart consumer, that is what that's what I would do if I was going to see me. I would want to know why I was being prescribed X amount of visits for X amount of time, and what the ideal program looks like. Because that always changes, right? As soon as somebody comes in, their shoulder hurts one day, their hip hurts the other day, and you're trying to connect the dots and put the pieces together. But there should always be a baseline level of clinical decision making attached to it. So I think for the active population, especially a lot of people that we see that do work sedentary jobs, and for a lot of them long hours, like there's some value in seeing us every other week. But if someone's pain-free and they're feeling solid, like I think that's a situation that they can, I would feel.
I don't know what that life means. I don't know what it's like to be pain-free.
But I think there's also like, I don't like the idea of having visits for visits' sake. But if there's a clinical reason behind it, absolutely.
Like more so like when I would sit and check in with you about my form and things like that. That's really important for me and like my goals and what I want to achieve. I just think because, just because I'm a fitness professional doesn't mean that I don't miss something. And because the way my body is shaped and just how I've moved my whole life, it's super important. And I see the value in it so much that I would probably go to physical therapy every day if I could. But,
I mean, you touched on a good point. Like, as long as it's connected to the client's goals, like there's value there.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably the best way to put it. There should be clinical reasoning, and it should be attached to the client's goals.
Which actually leads me into the next question. What's the best way to improve depth on a squat?
I mean, when I train a squat, I'll normally start off with, depending on the training age of the client and the just general movement confidence, I'll start them off on their back with their feet on the wall, because that's essentially the position of the squat. And as I've said in the previous episodes, really trying to emphasize the coordination of the obliques with the hamstrings and the glutes. in order to maintain that rib cage, that dynamic rib cage, and capacity to achieve a pelvic position that is what you want for a squat. So, in the purest sense of a squat, the pelvis should stay relatively vertical as you drop down, and it should stay in a vertical line. Go to any gym and you'll see people loading on a back squat and then basically turning a back squat into a deadlift. Their hips will fly back, their knees won't move forward, and they won't have good depth because they'll get stuck on the front of their hips. So there are a couple ways to train that. One is to elevate the heels. That does more for people than there are more reasons to do that than just limited ankle mobility, but it allows for some displacement of your center of gravity, and the person won't feel the need to hinge quite as much. Coordinating a reach forward during the squat and really trying to push those arms forward gets those obliques engaged, and then you can typically get a little bit more depth. And then it's going to be up to either the person working out by themselves or the trainer working out with the person to gradually progress that load so that they can eventually get back up to whatever they wanted to be doing in the first place. And these are all broad strokes. I think, squats and deadlifts, you could do an entire.
You could do a whole series on it, honestly.
A whole series on those. But I think that, everyone's form is a little individual. I personally am not very good at squats. I'm tall, I have long levers, and it's really hard for me to maintain that vertical pelvic position. I have an easier time with deadlifts just based on my structure. And I think at times looking at someone's basic makeup and being able to program or emphasizing things in the program based on that has some value as well. Unless they're in an activity that requires one versus the other, or unless they're trying to compete. I think if someone's looking for general fitness, tailoring a program that plays to their strengths and tries to address their weaknesses, but doesn't make them live in this kind of elementary phase of strengthening and lets them see progress, has some value. So I think my first two, just kind of off that open-ended question, my first few points to train the squat would be to really get into that 90-90 with your feet up on the wall and train that rib cage and that pelvic position, and then elevate the heels a little bit and facilitate a reach.
I still have my clients do the reach because when you taught me that, I was like, that's probably one of the biggest game changes. I just took someone through an evaluation. Whenever I texted you, was it Wednesday? And I was just like, Garrett would be so proud but it's like a game changer because like certain things you just don't learn. And as a personal trainer, you literally learn hands-on, like you're not there with a PT and someone else to teach you. So that personally, in my opinion, is one of the biggest game changes for the squat.
Progressing load, I'll typically do the reach, and then I'll have them do like a kettlebell goblet squat, and then a bilateral kettlebell racked front squat, and kind of build things up that way. I think the back squat's really hard for a lot of people. I mean, the weight's on your back by definition, so you're already trying to fight that, which pushes you into an extended position. It's biomechanically a tough position that I think for a lot of people you don't necessarily need. You can still get the type of volume and the type of mechanical tension that you're looking for via front squat, via a Zercher squat, or if you have access to sandbags, you can be creative. And then there's tempo work as well. So I think if you're trying to get just stronger, there's a ton of different methods to address strength that don't necessarily require a bar on the back.
And a lot of people get scared about barbell squats. So actually, this kind of goes along with this because we talked about hamstrings. So how do you improve hamstring flexibility? Because a lot of people come in, their hamstrings are tight. I know this is going to be a huge, long answer because it could be so many different things I already know. So how would you go about improving someone that says my hamstrings are super tight?
I think the first thing I would want to do is assess whether they were actually tight. I think there are a number of reasons why the hamstrings can appear tight. The most common that I do see is that they're not actually tight. They are under constant tension, so they appear tight. So a couple points to make. A muscle can appear tight because it is actually shortened and needs to be lengthened, which would be indicating a need for increased flexibility. A muscle can be chronically lengthened, and it is now fighting from a lengthened, inefficient position. So it is constantly firing, which is going to make it appear or be perceived as tight. And then a muscle you can have a trigger point or some type of tension throughout the hamstring, which will also make it appear tight or be perceived as tight. And I think figuring out which camp that hamstring is lying in is kind of the most important factor in prescribing an intervention. So 3 different reasons, 3 different interventions. The first, flexibility wise, I think there are 1,000 hamstring stretches out there. I think I personally like dynamic movement. I think that, any type of dynamic warm up is going to be helpful. I really like walking cross connects, which is, walking normally, but when you swing that leg forward, you're bringing the other elbow and the elbow and the knee are touching. Hold on one second. Sorry, the headphones made it sound like the battery was dying, but I just checked them.
No worries.
So I think hamstring flexibility wise, like true flexibility, I think there's 1,000 different ways to go about it. I think the kind of trigger point-esque type pains, which is basically just a feedback loop that the muscle's under that is not letting it relax, requires that could require some type of tactile cue to interrupt that loop. So that could be a lacrosse ball, foam roller. What I will say is that the evidence does not support long-term benefits with lacrosse ball or foam roller. You're going to get some increased blood flow, some increased oxygenation to the tissue, maybe at the site, but it's not conclusive evidence. But short term, you'll get some increase. So I think once you do a lacrosse ball or a foam roller, like get up and move around. It's also not something that needs to be done for a half hour before every workout, which some people tend to do. In my personal opinion and out of my experience, the most common reason for hamstrings presenting as tight is a postural and a positional thing. So the hamstrings attach at the ischial tuberosities and then travel down to the knee. My pelvis likes to be in this position, which is sticking your butt out and arching your back. This attachment here has moved further away from the knee. So you've taken up some of the existing slack. And it's going to be perceived as tight because that elongated muscle is constantly firing to try and keep your pelvis from continuing to dump forward. Continuing to stretch those hamstrings is not going to help.
Right, because there's just the structure.
It might feel good short term, but it's not going to solve the problem of having chronically tight hamstrings. So to solve that problem, it's really getting the tailbone underneath you, feet up on the wall, tailbone underneath you, and ribs down, and then progressing from there. It's a hard question to answer. Just the third section of that question was hard to answer, and it is because it's a long road after you get your feet up on the wall, and then you're building from there, because you shouldn't spend more time than necessary not in a weight bearing position.
Right.
But doing, an overhead pullover with your tailbone tucked and ribs down and bringing those hands up over your head, but not letting that rib cage pop up, is going to help reduce those symptoms or those sensations.
That's pretty much like 90% of women in general, honestly, especially I obviously fit into that category. Most people have a tilt like I do. So it's very beneficial because most people, again, I probably say the majority of people that I meet with, they're like, oh, my hamstrings are tight. Even guys, not as much just because of our body shapes, but I just think it's beneficial to know that and know that like foam rolling does, I do see the benefit in foam rolling because it makes my body feel good. It like, brings blood to all those things. But it's very interesting that you say that. But I just remember when I said I couldn't feel my muscles? What did we ever talk about that? Because I kind of want to touch on that because I actually in the last couple of weeks had a client say like she didn't feel anything. So I know that's really vague, but remember I couldn't feel my quads. Can you talk about that?
In what context?
Like as
Like what?
much weight as I put on it, I couldn't feel like my quads actually firing. Like I didn't feel the burn of like the muscle contracting. Nothing.
But you can see them contract, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think depending on which muscle you're looking at, I think the one thing, and I just have to cover myself with this, is that if there's like true sensory loss, like we're worried more about like a pathology than we are about a position. So if we've ruled out any type of significant issue that could impact sensory loss, I think in situations like that, if you can see your muscle firing, but you're never really getting the pump that you're looking for or getting that burn, to me, that would indicate that the amount of volume required to achieve that level of fatigue is so high based on a number of these other asymmetries that we've discussed. So for you, when we've talked, for you in particular, I would say that the volume required to get your quads that level of pump would probably be significantly higher than say your hamstrings. And that would, again, I'm just trying to, it's kind of hard question to answer, but
it's actually just like a very common though. And I just thought of it. And I remember that I had that specific issue and now I can feel them more in a lot of the reasoning behind me being able to feel it more, obviously meeting with you, but then doing some trial and error on my own to try to activate them in different positions, not in just like, I don't have a leg extension machine here, like in my gym. So when I go to the gym, sometimes I do have that issue and I just have to keep increasing the weight because like I'll feel like I put my hands on, I'm like, I feel this, I can see it moving, but it's just super common. And sometimes like I just genuinely can't, as much weight as I put on it. It's like something that I don't know, maybe that's a mental thing, but I feel like that could go so differently. But
well, I mean, I think that I would, without seeing the specific client, I would, if it's a quad, I would say that it's likely that the level of volume required to get that fatigue level is just, that requirement is just higher.
Okay.
The other thing to consider is using our previous example, if my pelvis is jumped forward, hamstrings are lengthened, the rectus, part of the quad muscle that attaches across the hip, is now shortened. So you're going to be in a more shortened state in a portion of the quadricep musculature. So that could influence it as well. There's just more of a kind of a chronic loading going through that quad. And to touch on your previous point of a lot of women presenting with tight hamstrings, I think I've had a number of guys over the past couple of weeks who have come in who seem to be presenting in the way that we're describing, but their symptoms manifest in the calves. So, and I can't, I can't speak to a cause as to why the experiences have been different. But I've seen a number of guys who come in that have taken their calves and try and turn their calves into their hamstrings and glutes, which would be just another step down the chain of that same positional fault.
Guys in calves, they're always trying to grow their calves. Oh, here's is that genetic, like the size of your calves? I feel like I could go back and forth with like fitness people and physical therapists about it because some people just genuinely say that they can't grow their calves. I'm not trying to grow mine, so like not like an issue I have.
I mean, I think everyone genetically has a certain ceiling for their ability to grow mass. I also think a lot of people are kind of chronically undertrained and haven't been able to program as effectively as they could. So while the people, I mean, I can't say that I have big calves, but I think that the people that say they cannot grow their calves could probably put some mass on their calves. It just, they would
They're not doing it right.
They would have to change the program a little bit, and I don't think that's bad. But I think there's something to be said that those same people probably wouldn't ever be able to have the calves of a high jumper or a professional athlete. So I think, you know, probably some value to both sides. But yeah, the whole genetic predisposition, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, like how some people can have like certain shapes. Yeah, we'll do that on the next one because that's actually a really good one. But I do have one last question. It's a little feelsy question, Garrett. So tap in, let yourself feel. What would you tell your 10-year-old self? I'm also going to answer this, so this better be good.
My 10-year-old self. I think I'll answer sticking to the same realm that we've been talking in, but I think that there's far more value at that age to playing 100 different sports than there is to specializing. So I would tell my 10-year-old self to not sweat like whatever team you don't make, or whatever, like not being able to play on the AAU team or not being able to do travel baseball, because the at that developmental stage, soaking in as many different movement skills and building movement competency in a variety of different settings is far more valuable long term than becoming an expert in one. I think looking at two separate 10-year-olds, one has a hitting coach, a pitching coach, the other plays a bunch of different sports. I would be telling my 10-year-old self, and I'd like to think, you know, if my son decides to play sports, I would like to think that I would be telling him that I would be happier to see him respond well in an unplanned and unchartered situation on the athletic field than I would be to see him excel in a skill that he has been trained in repetitively. I think at 10 years old, seeing someone react well has greater developmental value than, I use a pitcher because, I mean, baseball is kind of an easy example, but you know, a kid that's been trained on how to throw. So telling my 10-year-old self to, you know, find time to go do free play, to not sweat whatever the friends were doing on whatever travel teams they were on, to enjoy the travel teams I was on. But I think that telling my 10-year-old self not to sweat like the need to not be competitive, but not to think that it's the end all be all to be on every travel team and be, you know, you want a certain amount of competition and to take pride in doing a good job. But I don't think that there is a need to pigeonhole at that age or specialize in that age. So that was a long-winded answer. That's what I'd like to think I would tell myself.
Actually, it's not a long-winded answer. I like what you said there. I mean, I just feel like the level of stress that kids actually go through, which what I was going to relate mine to on a totally different wavelength, but that's fine. I just think a lot of kids go through a lot of stress, and we all want to be competitive. I think most people have a competitive nature to themselves, and I think that's what separates the strong from the weak. And that's just my philosophy on it. I think that there's people that are really good at certain sports and not good. So I like what you said, like not to stress as much about like making all of these teams and trying everything and like going with the flow kind of thing. That was the gist that I got from what you were saying. Like be able to enjoy it in the moment and progress with whatever works for you. That was my understanding.
Yeah, and I think my basis for saying that was just building movement competency across a large continuum of movement.
Mm-hmm.
So not narrowing down into one very defined sports skill or sports series of movements, but being able to run, jump, throw, basically be a kid. I also, talking about stress, I think like from what I've seen and the kids that I've treated, kids aren't bored anymore. And boredom actually fosters creativity. So I also tell my 10-year-old self to like, value some of that quiet bored time that you've had. Like those are good things.
Wow. You actually, I was just thinking that because kids nowadays literally are so stimulated through phones, iPads, laptops, video games. I feel like they're not, playing as much. And I just think back in the day, I'll never forget this. So I have an older sister, she's 6 years older. And growing up, like because she was 6 years older, she'd be like in high school and I was still like, yup, really like a little kid. And I wanted someone to play with me, like play sports. And I would get super bored. So I ended up just going outside and kicking a ball against the wall, like a soccer ball, because I played soccer. And it just like developed new techniques by myself just through boredom because she wouldn't play with me. So I was pissed at her. My parents were working. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll just kick the ball against a wall repetitively. And then that's how I learned how to juggle and all of that. But like what you just said really, like I wish we could take away some like aspect of like technology in that sense where kids could learn how to just go out and do things and figure it out more. So
I don't always think it's technology per se. I think I sound totally like the old man saying like go play outside, but I think there is some value in unstructured time.
yes.
And I think figuring out a way to entertain yourself during that unstructured time fosters good things.
Mhm.
So that's what I'd tell my 10-year-old self.
Well, I love it. So because I want to answer this, because I always have these little moments where I wish I could tell myself something like a year ago or 2 or 10 or whatever. So I would tell my 10-year-old self, who was a very high stressed individual for no reason. So nothing really has changed. I would tell my 10-year-old self to take a deep breath, put your head up, don't look down, don't listen to what anyone says, and realize that life is going to be a tremendous roller coaster, but you will figure it out along the way. And that's probably the best advice I could give my 10-year-old self right now, because I think it's super relatable as far as stress now versus stress then. And little kids can be cruel, but then I don't know. That's what I would tell myself. Stress less. It's going to happen, and life's a roller coaster, and to figure it out along the way.
Solid advice.
All right, Garrett. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm super excited for you and your wife. Please keep us all posted. And we will see you hopefully next month. Thank you, everyone, for listening or watching. Have a wonderful day, afternoon, night, and we'll see you in the next one.